another episode of Compliance Clips with your co-host Rick Morgan and John Farquhar. And today we have a special guest all the way from the Northwest US, which is not that far from the North Pole. So I know he's friends with Santa, but he won't give in to tell us where the secret lair is. So, but please welcome our guest, Chris Carver with DRAIVN, which is really not spelt DRAIVN, which is really confusing, Chris. So give our listeners a little quick background about you and how you spell DRAIVN and pronounce it properly.
It's great to be here, John, and it's great to see you again, Rick. Thanks for the opportunity to be here, and I'd love to tell you all about my friends at the North Pole, John, but I'm Chris Carver. I am a long way from the North Pole today. I'm here to talk to you guys a little bit about telematics, continuing that theme. And I'll tell you the quick version of my background is I've been doing telematics since I had a full head of hair. So
there you go. That's a long time.
So the last couple of years, I've had the unique opportunity to work with a number of insurance carriers. I was inside of Liberty Mutual running a program called Onboard Advisor. So everything I'm going to tell you today is based on hopefully some practical experience, give you some good advice for your folks who are all trying to do the same thing. And that's pay their fair share in insurance, but not too much.
Right, exactly. Well, and we have the opportunity, telematics is not a new word anymore, but unfortunately, there's still a lot of people that don't know what they should be knowing about telematics. Every vehicle that operates up and down the road has some form of telematics and data recording in it, but we're not utilizing it to its fullest capability here. And it's unfortunate because there's so much we can learn from it. So, and that's where DRAIVN comes in handy. It gives us the opportunity to kind of go, hey, what more can I see and what more can I do with this?
Yeah, absolutely. So the DRAIVN approach to data is to try to bridge the gap that we've discovered over the last decade as we've learned how to spell telematics. We figured out how to spell GPS. We got past it ELD. Now we got to spell telematics. We can't spell DRAIVN. So let me explain what it is. So the DRAIVN solution is one that's designed to bridge the gap between that traditional telematics safety score and those things, traditional or non-traditional, that our insurance carriers are looking at to try to decide what is the right rate for the risk. And if everybody will bear with me, I know we're all tired of presentations, but I'd like to just put up a quick graphic for you to show you what I mean by that gap.
Sure.
So here's a quick picture, which I think will resonate based on your last guest, my good friend Jim Angel, who talked a little bit about the safety score and retaining drivers based on good safety scores. We know that the safety scores in our business are made up of different components based on the vendors that you're using. Jim focused heavily on speeding. Speeding is extremely important. Seatbelts obviously are important. And then the levels of complexities of those various safety scores and information that's extracted by the now infamous telematics system varies depending on the vendor, depending upon the capabilities of the cameras, inward, outward, whether they're looking at accelerating, braking events, lane keeping capability. Here's the thing we've learned, and it's obvious to any of your listeners. The insurance companies are still looking at the traditional business based on a few very, very broad variables, and they have not gotten as granular as our telematics systems and all of our operational computers allow them to get. On the other hand, if they're not going to be particularly precise in how they're setting insurance rates, there's also been some challenges in terms of what data we want to share with them. So what I hope to share with your folks today is how we go from the traditional exposure variables that an insurance company is looking at. Hey, what's it going to cost me to repair or replace your truck? what is our capability to manage your claims affordably? What's happening with medical costs in the particular area where a claim may occur? What are the jurisdictions that you're driving? And we could spend an hour talking about social inflation and the differences between the cost of claims and who got involved. But all of these issues are geographic, and there are different jurisdictions and different kinds of claims management systems, which have driven up these costs. But we've got a gap in the middle. This great big gap, which sometimes we hear the word safety score and risk score used synonymously. They are not the same thing. This gap is really the utilization of our equipment. How are we taking, and how are your listeners, the motor carriers, how are they taking this mountain of data, simplifying it down and figuring out how to close that gap, frankly, simplify it and decide what do you really want to share with the insurance carriers. My friends in Oklahoma like to say it this way: they know too much already, those insurance carriers. The reality is that what we want to do, as the title of this slide says, we want to look at if we're going to assess our insurance premiums, not how do we compare, maybe somebody there in Ontario driving to somebody in Oklahoma, against somebody maybe in the Southeast. We want to know just how are we driving against other drivers in Ontario. We want to understand and assess our drivers and the exposure that the insurance company is assigning to our company as compared to what our safety score is telling us about the individual's decisions. Your presentation with Jim Angel about speed, I think hit on this point very, very well, in the fact that we have different drivers who don't even realize where they have that excessive exposure. And until you bring it to them, they don't get it. Mm-hmm. The big points here on risk score are: what is the time of day that you're driving? How does your driving compare to other businesses that look to you from an insurance perspective in the same geographic area? And are you driving those miles during the daytime, at nighttime? And then how does your maintenance program compare? And ultimately, as a risk, not just from a safety organization, but as a risk in general, how do you compare? And when you combine those together, your risk score and your safety score, that ultimately gives us a better indication of what kind of frequency the insurance company can expect from any claim that you might have. And of course, they're going to use their own actuaries to figure out the severity component of that. But that severity component, as this graphic shows, has a lot to do with the kind of hiring principles and management principles that are running behind your company. But if somebody's asking me, what's the best way to assess my insurance expense, which is obviously something we're trying to make transparent. The whole idea of DRAIVN is to try to give you some transparency and visibility into that. The best way to assess it is understand, is your risk score trending down? Are you able to adequately show against other companies that look just like you that for the same safety score, you've done everything you can to try to reduce the risk component? So I'll stop there. That's a mouthful, a lot to think about.
Well, it is, because there's a lot of mixture in there between what the motor carrier themselves and their team can do, what the insurance company's looking for, all the other aspects. And sadly, our insurance industry is still working on historical data, whereas by working with telematics data, we can get it in real time.
Right.
And I think one of the things that we're seeing that eventually is going to make its way, we're seeing it in the US now, is that user-based insurance approach with the use of telematics data, which can really help to give you a true premium of your risk today. Whereas the old-fashioned way was, well, that's last year's data, but I'm being graded against last year's data today. Whereas if I share my telematics data, I can get real time. And not to say that, hey, if I'm doing worse, I'm going to get charged more. Every insurance company's out there going, no, we're going to have a limit where we're going to charge you. But the whole idea is, if you're going to improve, I want to be able to give you that better premium that's reflective of your good performance today.
And if I can just step in at one point here, because once again, I know you guys have history, and when you start getting all excited and talking about these things, we sometimes forget that some of our listeners aren't familiar that we're, when we talk about telematics, most of us immediately think about my truck, my equipment telling me about my driver.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something different about what you're doing with DRAIVN, right, Chris? You are doing something a little bit different. It's not just my truck, my equipment, my driver that is driving, so to speak, the information underlying your slide here. Could you speak to that just a little?
Absolutely. So before I jump to some graphical explanations, I want to just take a moment and pick up on both of the points that you made, which is around, first of all, as John said, we're dealing with an insurance company that's looking backwards, not looking forwards. And even if we're going to tell our audience that we're going to someday be able to reflect how they're driving at an individual usage-based rate, that we've got good users. So point one is that's still going to be at a state level or a province level. And we all know that the drivers who are exposed to traffic up in Sudbury are completely different from the drivers on the QEW in Toronto. The drivers who are in upstate New York are completely different from the ones who are trying to get a truck across Manhattan at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
So step one is we have to look at how, even if the insurance company can give us granular rates, how do we make sure that we're comparing our local exposure, the rate that we're paying, to how do we look compared to other drivers? So to your part two, Rick, is what are we doing as a company? We're taking this information and bringing it down to a very local level, right down to the zip code. So in your particular zip code where your particular business is garaged, how are we behaving by comparison to other companies in that same area? And to make that assessment and to do it easily for those who would like to use the DRAIVN tool, they can sign up for it through their insurance broker. There's no cost to it. We have a little barometer, and this little barometer says, given how you're driving, given the trends here, what's tomorrow going to look like for you? And so the barometer is just think of it like your grades in school, 0 to 100. If you're in the 50th percentile, you're in the middle of the class. If you're in the top quartile, obviously, that's where we want you. Let me get that back. That's where we want you to be. And this happens to be a small fleet operating in and around Toronto. This is about 15 vehicles. But what's interesting about this particular fleet is the fact that they do drive over half their time at night. So if we're going to do the kind of rating comparison that John's talking about, and we want the insurance company to treat us fairly, we want to be rated against other operations operating 50% at night, operating on the same type of roads and driving the same type of day. Then these harsh braking events, when we compare ourselves against other operations in the same congestion and in the same area, is fair.
So you're normalizing the data for the given application. In other words, when you're looking at your performance is respective to other operators who are subscribing to your solution that are doing the same type of application.
Exactly.
And that wraps up part one of our conversation with Chris Carver from DRAIVN. We hope you enjoyed our discussion with Chris as we uncovered how DRAIVN normalizes telematics data, offering a unique perspective on fleet management that is the shape of things to come.
But hold on to your seats, folks, because part two is just around the corner. And in our next episode, we're going to continue our exploration of how consolidated telematics data is driving tangible results for carriers, from improved performance to reduced insurance costs.
And look, we know we cover a few hundred miles of information at warp speed, but this solution and others in the telematics consolidator world are bringing yet another powerful resource to their subscribers. A powerful due diligence defense in litigation scenarios, providing carriers with a rock solid foundation for legal protection, all at no cost.
Wait a minute. John, I know I'm getting old and the hearing's not quite what it used to be because of that truck I drove many years ago, but did you just say at no cost?
Yipper, Mr. Morgan, you heard right. These services are being paid for by insurance companies. When was the last time you heard an insurance company was paying for something other than a claim or your salesman's annual bonus?
Okay, that seals it. This product must work.
Trust me, folks, you won't want to miss it. So make sure you tune in next week for part 2 of our conversation with Chris Carver from DRAIVN.
Until then, folks, drive safe and don't forget to subscribe to our podcast so you never miss a release. Compliance Clips is a joint production of Summit Risk Solutions and Links Consulting. Thanks so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing you in our next release. Take care.